In today's tier list, I will be ranking all 89 bow units from S all the way down to Don't based on how well they can use Rearm Tana's new Arcane bow. As this tier list has a massive amount of units, I will be breaking down all the units into movement types to make it easier to digest the information. You can find timestamps in the description down below if you want to find a particular unit you care about. Now, let's go over the criteria I use to rank these heroes. First is if the unit has access to preference skills. For example, a hero like Legendary Alm with Lunar Flash. Heroes that have preference skills cannot equip their preference skill and this weapon, so it has less value on them. Second, if the unit is due for refine or eventually get a refine in the future. Third, if the unit has already had their weapon refined, intelligence systems will most likely never add true re-refines, so this is a chance for those units to get better. Fourth, if the hero is a seasonal hero with no preference weapon. These units historically have never got preference weapons or refines, so this is their first chance at getting access to a preference weapon. Fifth, stat line. When you're looking at inheritable weapons, stat lines become a much bigger determining factor. 6. Movement types. Different movement types have access to different skill availability, such as infantry heroes having easy access to no follow-up. And last but most importantly, if you have a favorite unit you love, use it on them. Playing with your favorites is the most important factor. Screw the tier list, favorites are greater than meta. Now, let's quickly go over Arcane Nastrond so we get a better idea of its strength and weaknesses. First up, we have Slaying or Special Cooldown -1. This is great as it will make it much easier to proc Deadeye or other powerful specials. We also have the typical effective against flying foes. We have +5 to all stats if the hero initiates combat or is within 2 spaces of an ally. This is a great condition as it's very easy to fulfill. We also get a guaranteed follow-up attack. This is going to help out the slower bow units to double, which is nice, but it definitely has some major downsides we'll discuss in a bit. The next effect is 30% damage reduction against the foe's first attack. This is really nice as it can allow squishier, more offensive bow units to survive the first counterattack, so they can blow up the enemy with the Deadeye on the second hit. Or it can be used nicely on defensive bows like armors to increase survivability. Then the final effect is going to grant an additional bonus to attack based off the foe's max special cooldown. Essentially, you want the foe to have a low special cooldown, as the lower it gets, the more attack the archer will get. The minimum you can get is +4 attack, but the maximum is +10, which is massive. Okay, let's discuss some major weaknesses of this weapon. The thing is that a majority of bow units in Fire Emblem Heroes are offensive units. They want to initiate combat and kill enemies. Now the damage reduction, extra attack, stats, slaying, and guaranteed follow-up attack does help this, but the problem is that Hardy Fighter currently dominates the meta of every single game mode still. And guess what? Hardy Fighter has defensive null follow-up, which completely nullifies the guaranteed follow-up attack of this weapon. So when it comes to using this weapon in any competitive game mode at all, that effect pretty much falls flat. Now it's not completely worthless, but it definitely would have been much better as offensive no follow-up built into the weapon. So what it comes down to is you want no follow-up on pretty much every hero who is going to use this weapon, except armors who are going to be playing mostly defensively. Which once again, unfortunately makes this weapon really good on infantry heroes and armored heroes, and less powerful on cavs and flyers, which is typical of arcane weapons unfortunately. And another thing it shares with other arcane weapons is that it's really good with speed, as if you do run into follow-up denial, you can get past it by winning a speed check, but not defensive no follow-up. Now you can get no follow-up to your flyers and cavs through a hero like Katie and Lind or Fallen Lilith, but it is a hoop you will need to jump through, and that is kind of annoying. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's jump into the very first tier list, infantry heroes. At the very bottom of the tier list, we have heroes who should absolutely not inherit this bow. These units have very powerful preference skills that they do not want to abandon, and typically their preference weapon is already better. In already good tier, we have 4 units who have great weapons already, and this weapon really isn't much of an upgrade. You could use it on Norn if you want to play a bit more offensively, but I feel like her weapon is already pretty good. In C tier, we have our slow, bulky archers. This weapon can work on them with the builds I'm showing, but it's typically going to be better on offensive and fast archers. If you do want to make use of it on one of these characters, I recommend one of these builds. The first build is designed as a special spiral bonfire build. Essentially anyone who attacks into Midori will get exploded with a damage reduction piercing bonfire, and thanks to her own damage reduction in her weapon, she's not the easiest to kill. The second build is an Ignis build you could use either with a special acceleration support like Thor or Na, or against any opponent who can counterattack against Gordon. It will make use of a big powerful Ignis that will deal a ton of damage. And then our final build is a tank archer build. We're going to be doubling down on damage reduction with the weapon effect and guard 4, while also being able to retaliate with a massive iceberg empowered with true damage, and healing thanks to the finish skill. Okay, let's move on to B tier. We have archers who have middling speed. They can use the weapon fine, but are not as good as the heroes above them. The same could be said for A tier. These heroes do have much better speed, but some of their attack stats are a bit low, or they are just outperformed by the heroes in S tier. And of course, S tier is where we have our fastest and hardest hitting archers. These heroes have great stat lines to take advantage of this bow. As you can see in the builds I'm about to show, they want some kind of null follow-up support. Our first build is Special Spiral 4 Ruptured Sky Nuke build. Essentially, you'll be able to launch off a special that ignores damage reduction and shred right through your enemies. When it comes to A skills, typically Finish will be your best option, but feel free to use whatever skill, including the attack speed unity that Tana comes with. Next up is a Tempo Deadeye build. This build gets around the weakness of Guard and ensures that the archer can get off Deadeye in every single combat. Then we have Ninja Shinon with a mixed phase build. This build will pre-charge Ruptured Sky so that Shinon can retaliate with it before the foe can even attack. This build can work great with a near save unit and Anima Season. The fourth build is one that focuses on damage reduction and getting the hero into desperation range. Once in desperation range, the hero can unleash Deadeye every combat before the foe can even counterattack, as long as they don't have Guard of course. The fifth build is more of a budget build that can allow the hero to pop Deadeyes off while also getting around the foe's bonuses thanks to the lull. And then the final build is for people who don't want to rely on outside no follow-up support. You can essentially run NFU in your B slot or Seal slot, but you will lose quite a bit of power with a build like this, so that is something to consider. Now let's move on to our armored tier list. Armors can actually make pretty solid use of this bow, and is typically their best option as most of them are seasonal units. The only unit I wouldn't use this on is Christmas Marth, as this weapon is already great and very unique. In B tier we have Halloween Jacob, who can use this weapon quite well as a bulky save, something that we'll see a lot of in this tier list. In B tier we have our two bulky saves in the form of Faye and Raphael, and two speedy saves in the form of Niles and Felix. And then finally in S tier we have the two armors who perform both the tanky role and the speedy role best, just due to having more of an optimal stat line. Our first build is going to take full advantage of the new Vengeful Fighter 4. One of the big problems bow saves have is denying follow-up attacks, but with this build you get most of the necessary effects you want. You get damage reduction from the Arcane Bow, Guard from the Stance 3, Vengeful Fighter 4 gives you follow-up denial, stats, and special acceleration, and this will allow Annette to retaliate with a bonfire, dealing massive damage. Now there is some downsides to this build. First, there is some overlap between Vengeful Fighter 4 and the bow because they both give guaranteed follow-up attacks. And then obviously you still retain your major weakness of damage reduction piercing to things like lethality or Deadeye. The second build is similar to the first, but we are more focused on sustain. New Time is going to allow Annette to heal up with every single counterattack, and Distant Defense 4 is going to turn off the enemy's visible bonuses, making them easier to tank and removing any chance of some bonus doubler shenanigans. The final build is for the more speedy far save bows like Ignatz, Felix, and Niles. This build is going to double down on damage reduction and rely on speed to keep your far save alive. This build is heavily reliant on speed, so I wouldn't recommend it for Ether 8's defense, but it can work quite well on offense. Now let's move on to our Cavalry tier list. Now in my opinion, Cavs use this weapon quite poorly unless you have Katie and Lynn running around besides them all the time. Typically, Cav archers want to be used either as a hit and run unit or on something like a Cav line, but hardy fighter saves will eat up both of those roles with this weapon. Now when it comes to this tier list, I think there are a lot of heroes who do not want to use this weapon. On the bottom are the heroes with either preference specials like both Leafs or Valentine's Leo and Spring Bernie, who just have way better weapons, like ridiculously better weapons. In the already good weapon tier, we have heroes who have solid weapons that perform better than this bow for the most part. Wolf and Bernadetta could be argued, but personally I much prefer a built-in desperation effect than what this weapon offers. Now, when it comes to the tier list itself, there isn't much to go over. We are looking for as much attack and speed as possible, so the heroes with the better stat lines are just going to be on the top. Unfortunately, when it comes to builds, there isn't much variety either. Our first build on Astrid is going to be your typical max and best build. You essentially go for max damage, throw in a trace skill so you can retreat if you need to, and then throw in Panic Smoke 4 so you can debilitate the enemy team. The second build is going to make use of the Menace and Lull skill. The Menace can allow Leonie to provide her own buffs, which is nice, while the Lull will ensure the enemy doesn't get to do the same. Ruptured Sky is also another special option, as Leonie can proc it reliably every combat as long as the foe doesn't have guard. And our final Cav build is going to be a budget build. You can pick up all this fodder from Tana herself, and the rest from the 3 to 4 star pool or Grails. This build essentially relies on the damage reduction built in the weapon to get Lynn into desperation range, and allows her to go on a rampage in future combats. Okay, let's move on to our final tier list, the Flying Bows. Flyers are in a similar situation to Cavs with their lack of access to no follow-up. But they do have some advantages with their access to much better C slots, and they also make better use of Tana's fodder, as they can inherit Guidance 4, which is really powerful. Once again, at the bottom of the tier list, we have heroes who just have way better weapons or preference skills they don't want to give up. B tier is where it gets interesting, as we have two flying dancers who can really take advantage of the new Guidance 4 alongside their arcane weapon. The first build I'm showing is if you want to make a bulky Heath build. This build lets him survive hits with built-in damage reduction and also retaliate with a powerful bonfire on a second hit. The second build is a nice support build for Plumeria that lets her deal out some good damage while also providing mobility support for the team. And then we have the final Quan build, which is really nice for E3's defense in Dark Season. We stack a ton of defense on him so he can avoid Milo's isolation, and then we have him work with a nice dance trap. Essentially put the 7th defense unit in the front line, and then on turn 2 Quan will aerobatics over, dance them, and then provide guidance for warp for the entire team. This will allow your backline nukes to teleport forward and destroy the unexpected enemy team. It's a really cool and powerful way to make use of Quan, but it does require some investment as he does have to have enough defense to avoid the isolation. Okay, now at A and S tier we have our speedy bow flyers. These units can put out solid damage, but most notably, they can be extremely mobile and offer powerful mobility support at the same time thanks to Guidance 4. The first build on Summer Alintia is a warping nuke build. Attack speed Oath 4 lets Alintia warp around to her allies while also activating her Unity effect. This is the premium build you can go for, and honestly it's not too difficult to get as half the fodder comes from Tana herself. The second build is for a mixed phase flyer build. This is similar to how Brave Cloud works with Speed Preempt, but without the really powerful healing. It can be a fun build, but you will want some solid supports to back you up. And then we have the final build, which is a budget build that utilizes Tana's fodder to full effect. By inheriting all the prerequisites from 3 to 4 stars and Grail units, you can grab Arcane Bow, Attack Speed Unity, Deadeye, and Guidance 4, which really allows you to make full use of your Tana. And with that, my Arcane Bow tier list is complete. I do think that the Arcane Bow is one of the weaker arcane weapons we've gotten, but it is still pretty good, though it does have to compete with the amazing Whitecap Bow. Hopefully these tier lists were able to help you out and give you some good ideas on how to build your units and who to invest your Arcane Bow into. Now I'd like to thank my members for all their support, and if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. This has been Oblivion, I'll catch you all later.